A very good evening to you all, ladies and gentlemen. As Senior Vice President of the Academy, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you all here to the 19th Lloyd's Register Educational Trust Lecture. The Academy continues to be profoundly grateful to the Trust for its generous support of this activity because, of course, without that support, this annual lecture simply wouldn't take place. I'm particularly grateful on behalf of the Academy to David Moorhouse, the Trust's Chairman, who I'm pleased to see here, and Michael Franklin, its Director, because they've been instrumental in making this event happen, as many of the events before. So thank you to you both. Now, before we begin proceedings tonight around the lecture, I have another very pleasant duty, and that is to present the Academy's Sustained Achievement Award. This award recognises a UK-based engineer whose sustained activities over a number of projects, and by implication over a number of years, has made a profound impact upon their engineering discipline. The winner of this year's award is Professor Dracos Vassilos, Professor of Maritime Safety and Director of the Ship Safety Research Centre at the University of Strathclyde. Professor Vassilos drove the development of goal-based legislation in the maritime industry, as well as the use of first principles safety performance assessment tools to foster cost-effective safety improvement. These tools realise step changes in ship design and operation, with ambitious targets for zero tolerance in human life loss and environmental impact. For example, he established a scientific basis for damage stability, one of the critical elements of ship safety. In 1996, Professor Vassilos established the Ship Safety Research Centre, which is now a leading light on the maritime safety industry today. So, Professor Vassilos, it's a great pleasure for me to call you up to receive your medal and the certificate. Now, if I may return to tonight's lecture, it's a great pleasure for me to introduce our guest speaker for this evening. John Armitt is currently Chairman of the Olympic Delivery Authority, which is, of course, the body tasked with building the venues, facilities, as well as the infrastructure for London 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games in London. As you would expect from somebody in that position, John is highly respected within the engineering community and has brought his extensive experience in the building, civil engineering and industrial construction markets to his current role. John was appointed Chairman of the Delivery Authority in September 2007, having previously been Chief Executive of Network Rail from 2002 and Chief Executive of its predecessor, Railtrack, from 2001. But his distinguished civil engineering career goes back at least to 1966 when he joined John Lang as a graduate engineer. He's worked on major construction projects in the UK as well as overseas. 7 years as chairman of Lang's International and Civil Engineering divisions and 4 years as chief executive of Union Railways, the company responsible for the development of the high-speed Channel Tunnel rail link. Prior to joining Railtrack, John was Chief Executive of Costain, a position he held until 2001. He is, of course, currently a Fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering and has been so since 1993. The scale and complexity of the Olympics project, about which we will hear tonight, demands a civil engineer of considerable distinction. John himself has pointed out that the project to host the Olympics and Paralympics in London and ensuring the Games as a lasting legacy for the capital is twice the size of Heathrow's Terminal 5, but with only half the time available to finish the task. Before I invite John to deliver his address, I'd like to ask Michael Franklin, who, as I said, is Director of Lloyd's Register Educational Trust, to say a few words. Michael.
Sir William, thank you very much for that. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As Sir William said, my name is Michael Franklin. I have the privilege to be the Director of the Lloyd's Register Educational Trust. And it's an absolute delight to see so many of you here tonight. I think we were expecting around about 200 people, and it looks pretty full, so that's splendid. For those of you who may not know, the Lloyd's Register Educational Trust was set up in 2004 by Lloyd's Register to bring a sharper focus and increased resources to Lloyd's Register's long-standing charitable obligation to support engineering education and research worldwide for the public benefit. Of course, the name Lloyd's is quite common, and I also take the opportunity at this point of pointing out that we're nothing at all to do with Lloyd's of London or Lloyd's Bank, but we are, of course, as I've just mentioned, very closely associated with Lloyd's Register. Lloyd's Register's former chairman, David Morehouse, who is still the chairman of the LRET, as we refer to it on a day-to-day basis, and who is here tonight, was absolutely pivotal in setting up the Lloyd's Register Educational Trust, and I think deserves to take full credit for that. So thank you, David, for setting up this very splendid organisation. The LRET is solely and very generously funded by Lloyd's Register. But to give it strength and to comply with charity law and to allow it to be able to deliver its public benefit mandate, it is an independent organisation. It has its own board of trustees, and it's those 6 trustees who take all the decisions on how the funds available to the LRET are dispensed. In short, the Lloyd's Register Educational Trust's prime purpose is to fund advances in science, engineering and technology, education, training and research worldwide for the benefit of all. Those are broad fields, it's true, but there is a very clear focus there. Part of its work is funding a select number of public lectures around the world which focus on the impact that engineering makes. And tonight we're here to enjoy one of those select lectures. As has been mentioned, it's the 19th Royal Academy London lecture that Lloyd's Register and more recently the LRET has supported. So it's a very well-established, long-running series. It's true it is usually held a little bit earlier in the year, normally late spring, early summer, so we've had to wait a little bit longer than normal for this one. But I have no doubt at all that that wait is going to prove absolutely worthwhile. Of course, in these very difficult times which we all face, we need something to look forward to, and what better than London hosting the greatest show on earth? And who better to tell us about that and give us an early insight on how engineering will deliver that greatest show than John Armitt? So, ladies and gentlemen, I wish you all a very special evening. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it and find it absolutely stimulating. Thank you.
And now it's my great pleasure to ask John Armitt to deliver the 19th lecture. I might, in doing so, remark that the title of most of the other 18 contained the word risk. This one doesn't explicitly contain the word risk, but I suspect John might tell us there were a few implicit risks. John, please.
Thank you, Bill, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Some years ago, I had the privilege of serving with David on the Lloyd's Register Council, so it is a particular pleasure and honour to be asked to give this lecture this evening. We're now only 239 days and counting from the opening ceremony of what will be the 30th Olympics, the 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games. So it is a good time to be able to look back at what's been going on for the last few years and since the Games were awarded in 2005 and forward to the final preparations. 2012 will be the third time that London has hosted the Games, 1908 and 1948 being the previous occasions. This was actually the first time that London actually had to compete with other cities. In the run-up to the final decision, which was announced in Singapore in 2005. Paris was many people's hot favourite. I remember going to a dinner just a week before in which we were all asked to write down who we thought was going to win, and out of 18 people, I think 13 wrote down Paris. So why do we think London won? Well, the bid was led by the former Olympian, of course, Lord Seb Coe, who promised to the IOC that London would deliver the best games ever, to create a vision of sport that would act as an inspiration and legacy to young people around the world. Also a legacy of wider sporting participation in the UK, and it has to say that is probably one of the most difficult legacies to achieve. And a physical legacy of regeneration in London, and a broader social and economic legacy with a particular focus on sustainability. So no shortage of promises. There was a 550-page bid which set out how the games would be delivered, the locations, the finances, the transport, a particular concern for the IOC, who always complained about their journeys through London, plans for the Olympic Village, and the development of the Olympic Park on what was very much a brownfield site known as the Stratford Lands in East London. As has already been said, the Olympic and Paralympic Games are the greatest show on earth, or the largest single event in the world, described as the most complex event that any country can undertake other than going to war. And here, in fact, is a reminder of some of the basic statistics. 205 competing nations, and the first thing that flows from that is that there will be, at the worst situation, over 100 heads of state in London. And if you can think of the chaos that's caused when we have a G20, then we've got 100 heads of state at peak. 17,000 officials and athletes, 26 different sports, and as Seb always reminds us, each sport having the equivalent of its world championship. So those all going on at the same time. So 26 World Championships, 22,000 accredited journalists. And those are the accredited journalists, far more difficult with the other 20,000 unaccredited journalists who will be floating around London looking for any story they can grab hold of. And in fact, one way of trying to control those is that they've been now caroled into the Institution of Civil Engineers as being their base. So at least we know where they are, or hopefully. 8.8 million tickets now. The number's gone up since the slide was produced, and of course most of those, as you will know, have already been sold. And then similar but slightly lower figures for the Paralympic Games, which will be returning to London for the first time since 1948, when the inaugural Paralympic Games were held in Stoke Mandeville in 48. And hence you get the mascot called Mandeville for the Paralympic Games. Now, a critical aspect of any major event is the governance structure, and this slide shows how that's been established for the London Games. The awarding body and the ultimate client is the IOC, a committee of 100 strong, made up of representatives of various nations, ex-Olympians, sports administrators, and then responsible to them is the OCOG, as it's called. In Beijing it was BOCOG, in Sydney SOCOG, and so hence in London OCOG, the organising committee for the Olympic Games. They are responsible for putting on the Games and ensuring their success. It's chaired by Seb Coe, and in London their budget is approximately £2 billion, and they are a private body, and their £2 billion they get from the ticket sales and from the money which comes in from the different sponsors. They get a slug from the IOC, from their worldwide sponsors, and then they have to get money from what are called the home sponsors, or the sponsors particular to the London Games, and they're getting about 700 million from the home sponsors. They're getting about 500 or 600 million from ticket sales, and then the balance has come from the IOC. For London, an Act of Parliament established the Olympic Delivery Authority, and we are a public body responsible for the delivery of the infrastructure, the transport, and we have a budget of £8 billion, and we get that £8 billion from lottery, from central government and the GLA. Central government was the classic case of the Chancellor going and tapping various departments on the shoulder and saying, well, you're in for £1 billion and you're in for £2 billion, but of course you've got no extra money. So it had to come out of existing budgets. The oversight of LOCOG and the ODA is by the Olympic Board. The members of the government ministers, so the DCMS, Department of Culture, Media and Sport ministers, are on that. And then Seb Coe, the Mayor of London, and Lord Moynihan, who represents the British Olympic Association. And basically, in summary, LOCOG put on the show, we build the theatre, and the BOA provide the British team, and I'll act as the hosts to the competing countries and their athletes. So now let's move on to the particular activities of the ODA, the body that I've been involved with since 2007. We are that horrible thing, an NDPB, a non-departmental public body, responsible to the Secretary of State at DCMS, Culture, Media and Sport. And as I say, we're there to deliver the infrastructure, the venues, the athletes' village, the transport infrastructure, and devise and implement an effective transport plan, all, of course, as you would imagine, to time and cost, but then all in a sustainable manner, and most importantly, and to leave a lasting legacy. An early decision which had to be made was the extent to which the ODA would try and do all this itself, or whether, in fact, it would seek help. And the decision was made, well, we're a limited life body. It's going to be very difficult to put together a team of 700 people to do this from scratch with no long-term future for those individuals. So the decision was made to appoint a delivery partner. The respective roles were that the ODA would act as the client and establish the specification for the different venues and the infrastructure, let the main contracts, set the standards required across 6 key themes which we maintained apart from time and cost, from safety to employment, sustainability and so on, to deal with the external stakeholders and deliver the transport plan. The delivery partner was there to manage the construction programme on our behalf and to support us in delivering our overall objectives. The delivery partner also managed the complex logistics across the Olympic Park, including security. We have peaked at about 250 staff and the delivery partner at about 550. They were incentivised to meet the programme and to contain the whole programme within budget. And equally, our executive team was similarly incentivised so that there was an alignment of objectives across those 2 teams. To try and ensure the overall programme, it was split into 6 phases, as shown on here. It was also described as the 2-4-1 policy. 2 years to plan it, 4 years to build and design and build, and 1 year for fit out by LOCOG and the events trials. The early stage focused on determining the location of the various venues, their outline design, submitting a huge planning application. We submitted that largely to ourselves because the ODA had been given planning powers, something I recommend to anybody undertaking a project of this nature. But in order to sort of take it forward in the best of spirit, we actually created a planning committee which involved the local boroughs, and whilst we chaired it, the local boroughs had all the sort of say that they would normally expect to have in any normal planning process. And in fact, we've never actually used the ultimate powers that we have had, and I guess that to a degree is clearly a credit to Lorraine Baldry, who's been the chair of that committee. At the same time as that was going on, the LDA used its compulsory acquisition powers to assemble the site. So we didn't have to assemble the site, the LDA did it for us, and they had to provide compensation to approximately 100 companies, and they had to be moved off to new locations. In addition, there were 3 groups of travellers who also had to be provided with new campsites in the area, off-site. For me, that was a learning experience that shows that travellers don't like travelling. When I pointed this out to their MP and thought it was all rather odd, and as a construction man, I'd spent my life travelling, she said, "No, John, that's politically incorrect." Got my wrist slapped. But, anyway, in July 2007, the LDA was able to hand over to us 600-acre site, which is about the same size as Hyde Park. And the second phase, which then lasted lasting a year of demolish, dig and design, was commenced. Now that period was devoted to preparing the site, carrying out design to the point where we could let the design and construct contracts, and also demolishing about 200 buildings. By 2008, in July, just as the Beijing Games commenced, we were able, as planned, to commence what was then the third phase, the big build. This phase, 3 years, then leaving the year of planning at the end for the fourth phase of testing, and then that obviously followed by the transformation to legacy after the Games. But engineering works really commenced in the demolish, dig and design phase, and the Stratford site, which we can see here roughly at that time, it's surrounded here by the Lee Navigation Canal running down the west. You've got the A12 dual carriageway running across the top. You've got the railway line which comes out of Liverpool Street, the Eastern Line running round here, past through Stratford International Station, going round there. You've got the Channel Tunnel Rail Link running right through the middle with Stratford International here. And not easily seen on here, but across the project, you can see one there. There were actually 52 pylons crossing the site with carrying National Grid power cables. And so one of our first tasks was to actually get rid of those cables and get the whole lot out of the way and underground. And we built 2 6-kilometre long tunnels under the park, and that project in itself was £300 million of just straightforward enabling works. The site had been used for all sorts of industrial use over a period of a couple of hundred years. You'd had early Bakelite industry there, early plastics took place there, and more latterly, of course, you had your fridge mountains and your car braking yards. You had some rail facilities still here, stabling yards, which we had to rebuild to the north of the site. And all this soil that you can see here was soil which came out of the tunnels of the Channel Tunnel Rail Link. So again, the site had been used simply to dump soil on it. So it was very heavily contaminated with heavy metals, petrocarbons, arsenic, and so on. Dealing with that contaminated soil presented a very early challenge to our sustainability credentials. Go back 20 years and all we would have done was dug it up, put it in the back of lorries, horse it off to a landfill site somewhere and clutter up all the local roads whilst we did so, and then bring in nice fresh material to replace it. So it was decided we wouldn't do that. We would clean this contaminated soil and seek to recover as much as we could. And this was just one of 5 soil washing plants which were introduced to clean and recover the contaminated soil. And 2 million tonnes went through these, and we in fact recovered 95% of the soil. 5% went off to landfill. Contaminants stick to the finest grains within the soil, so you're left with a sort of cake at the end of the day, which can just be go off to landfill. At peak, we had about 60 laboratory technicians just testing hundreds of samples every day. But the result was that we were able to reuse all that material for backfill, drainage, embankments, and so on. I mentioned 200 buildings which are on the site earlier. They all were demolished, and again we recovered and recycled 90% of the material there, some of which then went into the construction phase, such as lots of granite curbstones and hardcore brick slabs, and other buildings which were actually taken down piece by piece and sold and shipped off to other locations. The River Lee runs right through the centre of the park and clearly had the potential to be a key attraction. However, it's tidal, and at low tide you are exposed you expose the mud banks, and of course in amongst the mud banks you had the shopping trolleys, the old bikes and everything else. And indeed one day they found the remains of a car. Inside the car was a safe. So much excitement whilst the oxyacetylene was delivered, and the safe was cut open to find nothing inside it. So another early project was the building of a lock where the Lee enters the Thames. That enabled us to control the water levels and essentially maintain high water through the park, making it obviously look nice, control the flooding. And at the same time as we were doing that, we obviously dredged and cleaned the river right the way through the park and did all the good sustainable things of looking after the species and taking them away until they could be brought back again and so on. By July 2008, then, we were ready to start the big build phase of the project, and I'll now take you through some of the key structures and the venues. I've already referred to the undergrounding of the power cables, but that was just one of many infrastructure schemes. In fact, we spent more money on infrastructure than we have on stadia. We put in a site-wide 2-kilometre, 1.2 diameter trunk sewage system, which was about 18 metres down. And the pumping station for that, shown here, lifts the sewage actually into Bazalgette's 19th century system, which actually runs along the south edge of the park, so it's rather nice. And in fact, although you can't see it on here, around the back of this building, you've got a curved concrete wall, and they took Bazalgette's plans and have actually engraved them essentially into the concrete. So on a good day, when the light's right, you can actually see his original drawings in the surface of this building. We then put in a combined cycle energy centre, which provides 90 MV of heating, 52 of cooling, and 12.3 of MVA of electricity. It was built, this is the actual power unit. It was being built by a major energy company, and they have a concession for 40 years to operate it. It's fired by natural gas, but in fact we've also put in biomass boilers so that we can use 20% biomass, particularly for the heating capacity from this building. There's a primary substation alongside it, which you can't see on this slide, which is all black brick. It's all very modern. The brick is in an open weave, and in fact at night the lights come on and the light comes through the weave of the building, and you don't see any transformers or anything at the substation. Is all inside there. Then you've got 100 kilometres of 11 kV cable running around the project, distributing power. Then you've got all the gas, the electrical communications, water networks, all laid in dedicated pathways, and of course a massive ICT requirement as well, with all the ducting and so on for that. Nearly all the buildings have got rainwater harvesting systems, and that rainwater is then used for irrigation and urinal systems. Thames Water with us have put in an experimental black water treatment plant, which is taking sewage out of the Bazalgette sewer and then treating 600,000 litres a day, which again is then providing non-potable water, which is being put back into the park for irrigation and urinals. A whole series of bridges, 35 bridges have been built across the site. Mostly they are composite steel concrete deck structures, but quite a lot have been built in two parts. And on here you can see quite, hopefully, here you can see very much the two parts of the bridge, a permanent part and a temporary part. In fact, if I get this the right way around, I'm pretty sure that the permanent one is this one. And this one here gets lifted out after the games because we just don't need bridges that wide in legacy use. You do need them for the massive number of people which are in the park during the games. So all of these bridges pretty well are built in two parts. So let's now have a look at some of the stadia. And of course, a starting point for any games is to determine the extent to which the existing facilities that you have in the country or in the city can be used. To the extent that they're not suitable, then the next decision is, should we build a temporary venue? Or is there justification for a new permanent venue? And that decision process went through for each and every venue. The main stadium was a significant challenge in this respect. You need 80,000 capacity for the opening ceremony and for the main athletics events. For the UK, 80,000 seats, that's only going to be of interest for a national football stadium or for one or two of the Premiership clubs who can utilise a capacity like that. Wembley could have been adopted. Many people say, why didn't we go to Wembley? And fundamentally, security and transport, moving hundreds of athletes up to Wembley and back each day, separating them from the main Olympic village and park, basically made that a non-starter. So at the early stages of the design of the stadium, we had West Ham sort of drifting around in their Icelandic ownership with all sorts of interest but no money. And so in the end, it was not possible to identify a committed long-term user of the stadium. In Singapore, SEB had committed to the IOC that there would be, in Legacy, an international athletics track with a capacity of at least 25,000 seats. And indeed, international athletic meetings, by and large, don't attract many more than that. So a decision was made in 2007, probably for the first time, we think, that we would build an 80,000 seat stadium for the Games, which could then be demounted to 25,000 seat facility, so reducing the risk of having a white elephant after the Games. We used the natural fall of the land at this end of the stadium. We basically went in at ground level and we just used the land to put in a 25,000 seat lower bowl, and then above that we put in the extra 55,000. And here you can see the stadium blown up. You've got this lower bowl of 25,000 seats. You've then got 55,000 seats contained in a steel, structural steel frame, and then separately another structure holds up the roof here. These beams going around the top here, the tubular steel beams we've got around the top, those are recovered gas main pipes from a project which ordered too many gas main pipes. So that was quite handy. The torsional ring on the inside here, which holds up the inside of the fabric roof, is also at stress to 1,200 tons, and that is capable and is carrying 34 14-ton lighting towers on top of it. The bolted steel structure can just be very easily, as it was, assembled and dismantled. Although, of course, since its completion, and when Gordon Brown came to visit us, he walked across the bridge onto the stadium, and his first words to me, "You're not going to take this down, are you?" And now, of course, we've got various football clubs, or have had, fighting over its use in Legacy, and almost certainly at the moment, I suspect, it will not come down. It's been now, we've won the 2017 World Athletics Championships, although you don't need 80,000 for that. But that certainly has assured the future of the stadium, and almost certainly now I think it will be at certainly somewhere between 60 and 80,000 in Legacy. There are 700 separate spaces underneath the stadium around here. One of the key things to notice here is that in trying to make it very simple as a structure, these, what I call the Smarties, around the perimeter here, are actually the sort of retail and catering units that normally you would have inside a stadium. We pulled all of that out in order to make the stadium as simple as possible. So these would all be temporary facilities on the concourse level around the outside of the stadium. Really fundamentally driven by that desire for simplicity. I think we've got that's it during construction, which shows it very clearly. The steel frame, just everything here precast concrete going on for the seating. You can see the structure for the roof separate from, so the white steel basically separate from the black, and it went extremely well as a facility. And then you can see the lighting towers which have been put on the torsion ring on the inside. The zigzag design here is a sort of breakdown of the Olympic logo with its sort of hazardous shapes, if you like, and you can see they've even tried to follow that through in the alignment here of the asphalt on the outside. The IOC, of course, get always something different, so they've got their box here, which is basically the hospitality suite for the IOC and the officials from around the world. So that's the main stadium. The aquatic centre, that featured at bid stage as an example of what we could do in terms of iconic buildings for the Games. And so an iconic design by Zaha Hadid was introduced to the bid document to capture the imagination. Great thing about iconic designs by iconic architects is that some poor bugger's got to then build it. And this one was no exception. So post-award, It was realised that what was designed was a bit too big for legacy requirements, so it was decided to scale down the original design, and consequently the core legacy building has a capacity of 3,000 spectators, and that's increased during games time to 17,500 with the addition of two very large wings on either side. Inside it, you've got a 50-metre competition pool, a 50-metre warm-up pool, and a dive pool. It's worth remembering that there is not an Olympic dive pool in London today, so the divers go to Sheffield to train. The roof was a challenge, and here you see the structural steel roof. It spans 110 metres. It's got an overall length of about 160. The beams at the centre are about 11 metres deep, and the whole thing weighs about 3,000 tonnes. To speed up the programme, we obviously decided to get that up first and then put everything in underneath it. One complication was that in planning those two tunnels for all the National Grid cables I mentioned earlier on, we'd managed to put those under the pool. Here you've got it supported here, there's another column over here, and then there's this wall here, and they're the 3 points of support. And the cables, basically, the tunnels went through here. So there was a massive transfer slab which went across here to take the load and ensure that these didn't actually bear down on the tunnels at all. The problem with that is it all rather put the programme back, and so we started to build the roof from this wall as soon as we'd got this wall up. But that is actually the floating end of the roof in Legacy, so that had to be fixed and built away from, with temporary stands running through to support it as it was bolted. It's a bolted structure as it was bolted together. And then once it was finished, we had to jack the whole thing up in the air to actually put the sliding bearings in under here, and at the same time remove the temporary support. So that was an anxious moment. It was done on a Saturday and Sunday when nobody was around. I stayed at home and simply suggested that the design engineer should sit under it whilst it was being done. But it settled to within just a few millimetres. It was all done with a laptop. So a laptop controlling all these jacks, lifting the whole thing up, and then on the laptop they could see 200 points around that roof and what position each of those 200 points was taking up. And it took up all the positions to within a few mil of what had been designed. So an enormous credit to the designers who, not surprisingly, were over Arab. I mentioned the two temporary wings, and you can see them in all their glory here, not adding a great deal to the iconic design, it must be said. But in each of these, you've got 7,500 seats, and those are totally temporary. They're just a heavy steel frame wrapped in PVC, and they are taken away after the games, and those are then replaced by, that's the interior. I forgot I put that one in. You can see again the scale of the roof here. It is very, very dramatic, and there's no doubt about that. Here are the temporary wings going away to either side. So the legacy seating is the seating through here. You've got a 50-metre pool, dive pool. Zaha designed the diving boards, and if anybody's seen the advert for the taps that she's designed, not so dissimilar. More reinforcement than concrete in those. And the floor of the pool goes up and down, and then from 3 metres deep up to 0. So you can vary in legacy for different use for people with disability or school children. And then the end boom here, which obviously has to be pretty accurately positioned for the main races, can actually be trundled along, and you can create two 25-metre pools, or indeed a 35-metre pool if you want to use it for water polo. And through this glass wall here, and under what is the main access bridge to the park, integrated with it is another 50-metre pool, which is the training pool. So, and then from the outside in Legacy, temporary wings come off, and then this glass wall goes the full length of the centre, and that actually is basically cantilevered off the bottom and just floats at the top here, because the movement in this lot, as you can imagine, is enormous. It floats around by about 300 mil at the end here. And so you can't fix this glass to it. So the glass just is floating in a baffle at the top. So quite a challenging building. Next, the velodrome. The velodrome in Manchester, built for the Commonwealth Games, has been enormously successful since the Commonwealth Games. It's used 24/7. And so it was a pretty easy decision that, given that London has not got a velodrome, that we would build a permanent new velodrome in London with its indoor track. It's a 6,000-seat stadium. It is the most energy-efficient building that we've designed and built. Totally contrary to this one, we didn't start off with our iconic design and then wonder how we were going to build it and design it. There we had a totally integrated team of architect, engineer, services engineer, contractor working together right from day one. We've achieved a 31% improvement in over 2006 building regs. It's an extremely compact design. We've reduced as far as possible the overall volume to bring down the amount of air which has to be handled. We use natural ventilation and we use natural light on the building. And this shows you the roof, which originally was going to be a structural steel roof, and then again, as part of the review of the design as we went along, it was decided to have this cable net structure, which weighs about 100 tons compared with the 1,000 tons that the structural steel roof was going to weigh. So again, you just save weight then right the way through the building, because everything becomes lighter. That's the indoors now as it's finished. The track is Siberian spruce, and that is just a series of 2-metre-long, 40 mil square timbers, which are just nailed down. So a host of joiners just nailing down the track to a timber subframe behind it. You can see the degree of natural light which is coming through the roof lights, and then we've got a glass curtain wall which goes right the way around the perimeter. Fantastic. You don't really need any lights on there at all, and it is a very, very, very light arena. Along come the broadcasters, and they don't like natural light. So for the games, we've got to black all of that out and switch on an enormous number of artificial lights, because that's what they want for high-definition television, slow-motion replays, and everything else. So in Legacy, we won't use much electricity. During the games, we'll use an awful lot. Chris Hoy acted as a consultant to us whilst we were designing it. One of the things which worries the cyclists is that when they go around the end here, traditionally, the spectators are very much banked down the side here, so it all goes quiet, and they feel they're not being urged on sufficiently. And so with Chris's help, we took the seating right the way around the end of the wall here, so that they've got people actually looking down and shouting at them as they go around the end. In addition to this is the building from the outside. It's got a Colombian redwood surface on the outside, which everybody loves. For a long time, it's been known as the Pringle. The architect, of course, not totally in agreement with that. Here you've got the BMX track, which in these four walls, I will say, since the trial, we've had a few problems with. We discovered that the designer was actually designing it as he went along, notwithstanding that he was the world's best BMX track designer. So we're now having to make some adjustments to the earthworks there. But that will stay in Legacy. There'll also be, going around and around the park here, a 1-mile road racing circuit, and in the park around here they're going to somehow fit in a mountain biking circuit. So after the games, every type of cyclist will be catered for, and the whole thing is going to be run by the Lee Valley Regional Authority. Next to the velodrome is the 12,000-seat basketball arena. There is no economic case for a stadium of that size in this part of London, in Legacy. The existing facilities didn't meet Olympic standards, which always seem to be different to every other standard, or they had transport and security issues, and so it was decided to build a temporary stadium. And this is it. It's just a very large portal frame structure with a PVC covering and demountable seating, which is hired on the inside. All of our buildings sit on piled foundations, but because this one was temporary, we've actually built it on stone columns so that anybody coming along afterwards can actually dig those out quite easily if they need to. The structure is owned by the contractor who built it. And so the deal was, give us a price and then give us a discount because you can own it. And aren't you lucky? And take it away for potential use elsewhere. So if any of you are planning a large wedding, the Bar of Scotland will be pleased to help you. There's also a water polo stadium next to the aquatics that again is being built as a temporary structure. It's 6,000 seats. There, an interesting factor was that when we came to design the pool for the water polo, it was cheaper to design it, build it and demolish it in concrete than it was to actually hire in a big steel tank. But in fact we went down the steel tank route because that just seemed to be more sustainable and clearly could be used and hopefully passed on to others afterwards. Our other permanent structure on the park is the handball arena. And this is a 7,000 seat arena. It's a simple box structure, structural steel and concrete, very similar in concept to the Velo, with these light pipes which let natural light down through the roof, and then a glass wall which runs all the way around the perimeter, letting light in here. This is copper, and in fact, according to the weather, you just get totally different colours to this building. As the sun goes down, it looks absolutely fantastic, but it's a very attractive building, and in Legacy will become a sports community hall, basically, because handball we don't do in the UK, so we've designed it on the inside so that it's very adaptable, and this seating is all retractable and can be pushed right back against the walls so that we can increase the floor area in here, and the idea is it can just be used as a multi-sport facility by the community in Legacy. What look like spotlights, this is all natural light coming down through the light tubes. You can see the curtain wall around the back here. Again, we've now had to put baffles in the light tubes so that we can shut off the light for the broadcasters during the games. The biggest building that we've got on the park is the International Broadcasting Centre. 20,000 journalists, if you recall, and the broadcasters are all in here, 280 metres long, 90 metres wide, 30 high, two-storey building inside, and really just a series of very large open spaces, which the broadcasters then bring their modularised studios into. Then you've got the print media, so they have to have a separate building. So this here is an office, basically an office block for the print media. And then, again, you have to look after the journalists, so they're the only people who get a car park. So they've got a multi-storey car park here. And in the middle here, when this photo was taken, we were building the conference centre, the press conference centre, which sits in between the two. And then down here, all of this area will become tented, and it will have the catering arrangements for the journalists, but basically also everything from hairdressers to post office that they may need, and it's called the High Street, and in it you've got everything a journalist might want, because it is absolutely important that they are happy if nobody else is. Now, not everything takes place on the Olympic Park, and up at Broxbourne, about half an hour away, we've built a whitewater canoe centre. This is now open to the public for whitewater rafting or kayaking. So if you're feeling sort of wanting an exciting weekend, then that is open. In fact, the River Lee is over here, so it's again connected in many ways directly to the park. Down at Weymouth, we've got the National Sailing Academy, and they've had their marina expanded by us, and they're hosting the sailing. Out at Eton Dorney, you've got the rowing, and we've done stuff there to improve that facility. And then Eton, of course, school come along afterwards and say, well, this is wonderful, but now it's going to cost us more to maintain it afterwards. So please can we have some money to maintain all the improvements you've given us? And Boris, of course, by this time is in control. So he says, I went to Eton, I'll go and sort them out. We finished up giving him £1 million. Over at Woolwich Barracks, we're currently building 3 large white venues, which are quite fancy for the shooting. And 2 of those, I'm pleased to say, are going to go up to Glasgow for the Commonwealth Games for the shooting events up there, so they're temporary again. Mountain biking is in that hilly county of Essex. They managed to find one out at Hadley Castle, and so that's where mountain biking is taking place. Again, you can imagine why not at Fort William, where there's an international one, there's another one in Wales, but it was all to do with transport and security and the desire to keep things focused on London. Just on the other side of the A12, if you remember at the north of the park, is what's called Eton Manor. And on Eton Manor, we've got a whole series of sports facilities which are a mixture of facilities for the athletes, for their pleasure and training. There are 3 swimming pools there, 3 50-metre swimming pools, temporary ones, for the athletes, together with tennis courts and a permanent hockey stadium. But the hockey stadium is not used for the Olympic Games. During the Olympic Games, it's used for Paralympic tennis. So that space is used for Paralympic tennis. But after the Games will become a London-based, very significant hockey stadium at Eton Manor. And the rest of it all goes into the local community as, again, local sports facility with five-a-side football, tennis, and so on. Then you've got the existing venues which are being utilised. So we've got Excel, which is used for martial arts, table tennis, weightlifting and fencing and so on. You've got the gymnastics taking place in the O2, and the final of the basketball takes place in the O2 because it's got 25,000 seat capacity, and basketball extremely popular, particularly on television in America. Wembley is being used, the Wembley Arena is being used for badminton, Earls Court for volleyball. You all know about Horse Guards Parade and beach volleyball, where they had trials earlier this year. Tennis at Wimbledon. And then football floats around the country at various half a dozen different stadia. And in ticket sales, it's football that hasn't sold, interestingly. And that's because at the moment, nobody's too sure which countries are actually going to get through the qualifying rounds, nor does anybody know which countries will be playing at which stadium. So our sophisticated football audience here is waiting to see what happens before they buy their tickets. Another core feature of the park of the Olympic Park is what we call the Parklands, and after the Games the whole area is going to become the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park, and together with the River Lee the whole landscaping has been a great opportunity, and what we wanted to do was this is one of these pictures that moves, but if we move it round you can see the river and the landscaping which we've created. And originally the sides of the river were quite steep here, and so it's all been pulled back to create these slopes which open up the river, open up the views of the river. British Airways are going to have a double-sided screen on a barge which will sit in the river during the games so that people can sit on the areas either side and watch the games on the big screen. So the idea really to create an area which is very picnic-like and one which people can enjoy. We've put 2,000 mature trees into the parklands. The parklands basically change from the north end of the park down to the south. So up at this end, it's basically grass and trees. We've got several 100,000 wetland plants which we've put in through here. And you get down around the stadium, and there's about half a mile of planted gardens, more formal, more urban. And there what we've done is we've taken plants which have come from around the world, been brought to the UK over the last 300 years, and then they've been set out basically in the 4 continents, so that athletes from around the world will actually recognise plants which originated in their own countries, but equally are now indigenous to the UK. The landscaping, when you see it in reality, has actually been very successful. It's the largest park that's been created in this country for about 100 years. So it's quite an achievement. All sorts of species were transplanted, of course, and moved around. We've got several hundred bird and bat boxes, and now the latest thing is we've had to close the door on each of those because the security guys have come along and said, somebody could put something in that bird box or that bat box. So they're not allowed in until after the Games. The Olympic Village, 2,800 apartments for the athletes and the officials. 1 to 4 bedroom apartments, clearly providing enormous housing opportunity and legacy, and they've been designed for legacy and then just simply adapted for the Games. The main way we've adapted them for the Games is not to install the kitchens at this phase and to actually use the kitchen space as an extra bedroom, and then after the Games we'll retrofit the kitchens. We use 10 different architects, but with largely a common floor plate to get repetition in the construction. I mean, to build this number of apartments in basically 2 years is way, way ahead of anything that you would normally do as a developer in London. The whole thing's to BREEAM level 4 specification in terms of sustainability. At the moment in London, most developments are going up at level 3. So this is right at the cutting edge of technology in terms of keeping down energy usage and equally potable water. Potable water here is about 40% of what you would normally expect to be using. People often say, what was the one thing which is, what's the biggest thing that's given us a problem over the last few years? And this was all going to be installed by the private sector as a private sector development, given to LOCOG for the Games and then taken back after the Games. 2008 financial crisis, and that all fell apart. And so we've financed this ourselves out of our contingency sums and savings we've made elsewhere. And now, subsequently, in the last year, we've managed to sell the whole lot. We've sold 50% as affordable homes to a housing association, and the other 50% we've sold to a commercial developer. And they, in the first place, will probably let most of them rather than try and sell them, because if you put this lot on the market, you just clearly depress the price. So for several years, most of this will be apartments to let. In addition to the housing, we've put up an 1,800 school academy, an 1,800 pupil academy, and a polyclinic to obviously provide some of the facilities which are required in legacy. There are 11 separate blocks, and basically they're a quadrangular block with a landscape central area, and then under the landscaping, which is at first floor level, there's a car park underneath. So each block's got its own car park, it's got its own central landscaped area, and every apartment has a balcony, either looking in or looking out. Transport, absolutely critical. Atlanta was the classic case where they got it wrong, and some athletes actually missed their events in Atlanta. I don't think the IOC have ever forgiven America for that. And so it's absolutely critical for the athletes, for the officials, and of course for the spectators, because no matter how wonderful the architecture, if you arrive at the aquatic centre and you've missed the start of the race, that's what you'll remember. You won't remember the venue. And we've got literally hundreds of thousands of people coming to the park. The whole objective was to have a public transport Games, and it was calculated that probably about 70% would come by rail. Stratford is one of the best connected places in London. There are 10 different railway lines running into Stratford. So we've expanded Stratford Station, increased the area of circulation very considerably. We've moved the platforms around, improved them. We've done a lot of re-engineering and alignment of the railway in the area to increase its capacity. We've given money to the DLR, so the DLR trains are now 50% longer than they used to be. That means all the platforms, of course, have had to be lengthened. We've spent, with Network Rail, about 100 million or more on the North London line to improve that. And overall, we've spent about 500 million as the ODA on rail improvements in and around the area. We've built a new DLR station alongside Stratford International on the village side, so that people in the village can actually access the DLR directly from the village, as well as Stratford International, which of course is now a domestic railway station as well. During the Games, there'll be a high-speed dedicated service running on the Channel Tunnel rail link from St Pancras to Stratford. There'll be a train every 6 or 7 minutes, and we'll have a capacity of about 25,000 people that we can carry on that service with a journey time of only about 6 minutes from St Pancras into the centre of the site. For the rest of the rail network, we've had to negotiate with all the train operators to change slightly timetables and so on, have trains running longer, so the peak now is maintained pretty well through the day. And the last trains will run probably an hour or two later than is normally the case, so that people can get home at the end of the day. And basketball goes on till about 11:30. So you're looking at places like Paddington having to be open to receive people probably until at least 1 o'clock or 1:30 in the morning, and then get them out to Bristol and Cardiff. We've given an undertaking, we'll get anybody home who's within 2 hours of London during that evening. You'll have heard about the Olympic Route Network, which is about 2% of London's roads, but these are dedicated lanes and routes which have been established solely for the use of Olympic officials. That's upset the taxi drivers, of course. But again, from the experience of Atlanta, subsequently every country, every city has adopted dedicated lanes for traffic. So moving on, because I see time is moving on. Procurement. Clearly, we've procured an awful lot of things as the ODA. And so from the start, we had to sit down and say, well, how are we going to do that? In what way are we going to do that? There were a series of workshops which set out the values that we were wanting to achieve. How could we actually weave our priority themes through the procurement process? How could we actually meet those themes whilst at the same time trying to ensure that we kept within budget and obviously also kept on programme? So we finished up with what was the ODA procurement policy. It focused on best value. It didn't focus on cost. And so clearly you had to be able to build it on time. But after that, it was a mixture of cost alongside how good were you going to be, what were you going to be doing on the safety front, on the sustainability front, on the employment of disabled people, the employment of ethnic minorities, how are you going to handle all sorts of different issues other than just cost and programme. And then the whole lot was judged on a balanced scorecard, and we actually used people outside of the ODA team to run through all these and then feed in their assessment on the balanced scorecard of the various bids which we received. We then packaged the jobs up, and we packaged them up in clusters so that wherever we were, we had these basic clusters of enabling works, utilities, structures, permanent venues, temporary venues, landscape, and then logistics and security running as common themes through all of those different projects. The next stage then after that was to say, well, what basis are these contracts going to be on? And we used the NEC3 form of contract. We did that because it's one which requires early notification of problems by contractors to the client, so it's a pretty transparent approach. We used the design and build, so in each case the venues, having selected the architecture and got the basic design understood with the architect, we would then pass it across to the contractors to give us a design and build price. And then we said, let's have a target price rather than a fixed price, and we then said we will then share the risk with you on whether you undershoot or overshoot that target price. So the critical thing was the target price, obviously. So that was where the real negotiation took place. Having agreed that then, it was a 50-50 saving. So we shared 50p in the pound with the contractors on the undershoot, and if they went over, as always, the risk was limited to the contractor, and we picked up most of the risk on the oversight. So, but fundamentally what you're wanting to do is to motivate the contractor to look at every way that he can to keep the cost down, because he's then going to share in those savings. If I can just now return quickly to the key themes which I mentioned. here you've got some figures on the employment and skills theme. Obviously looking to take people out of unemployment. We achieved 13%, over 400 apprentices employed. A lot of pressure to employ local people. 25% were local. 40,000 have been through the park in total. And then if you look at the next one, health and safety, we haven't had a fatal accident so far, and we've kept down to a very low accident frequency rate. And when people say, what worries me going forward, it is this more than anything else, because as we get to the end, you run the risk of people being that much more careless, and a fatal accident is a very easy thing to happen, particularly where we've got so many vehicles and things running around, and we've still got work going on at height. And then sustainability, these are just some of the issues there. We created a timber panel so we told the contractors who they were going to get their timber from, we having identified that they were sustainable sources. We also we provided the cements and the aggregates to the contractors so that we could get it in by rail and that it wasn't coming in a sort of haphazard way. We set ourselves at 50% of materials coming by rail. We've achieved about 60%. Relatively easy, given that we had a jolly great big Bow East rail depot on the corner of the site. It would have been a different story, clearly, if we hadn't had rail so immediately adjacent to the park. And 75p in every pound that we've spent, we're pretty sure is still going to be there in 100 years' time, and so a very sustainable expenditure. In addition to these three, as I said earlier, we had targets set set to us by the government on equality, diversity, inclusion, and it does work. There is no doubt that if you make it very clear that you want to achieve these different sort of objectives in addition to just building something, and you set it out from the beginning, and then as the client you constantly monitor and manage it, you can actually achieve significant change through the supply chain. And I think it's one of the things that we've learnt from this. So where are we today? Well, the infrastructure for the Games is now 94% complete. It's on time, it's under budget. Why is that the case? Well, I would say cross-party political support we've had right from the beginning. There's nothing like a fixed deadline to focus people. We've had a sensible budget. There was a lot of argy-bargy about the budget at the beginning. We finished up with a sensible one, and that makes a big difference, I think, to the quality of your decision-making. We, as the client, have tried to be very clear in providing leadership and a very, very rigorous approach to program control and change management. We literally would just refuse to acknowledge change. We'd give way occasionally, but by and large, we just said, right, as we stage-gated our way through the program, no more change from particular points. And a very strong assurance regime. As an ex-contractor, I used to hate being audited, but there's no doubt it works. And we've had a very strong assurance and risk management regime here. David Higgins, who's been the chief executive for most of the program, said to me one day, Johnny, I think there are 10 different people auditing us, 10 different groups auditing us, from the NAO and the PA Public Accounts Committee right the way through to our own internal departments. So today we've only got 35 weeks to go before the opening ceremony. All the venues are essentially complete. The Athletes Village will finish handing over at the end of January, and we hand over to LOCOG, and this is what LOCOG have to do between now and the Games. A massive amount of work. A great deal of equipment to be installed, particularly on the communication side and the broadcasting side. The sponsors' pavilions have to go up. All the big sponsors are going to build very fancy pavilions around the park. They've got 65 hectares of tents that they're going to be erecting either here or at the other venues. And we'll be rushing around behind them, completing the landscaping. As they dig it up, we'll put it back. And of course they'll be holding their test events as they go along. We've already had some, but those have gone well. So we're in a situation where I think we can say we're almost there, and I am very confident that in July next year we will be in a very satisfactory position to host the greatest show on earth. Thank you.
John, thank you very much for an enthralling presentation, and you've agreed to take a few questions from the audience. Can I ask you, please, there are roving microphones, and we'd be very grateful if you would use them because we are recording this event. Can you state your name and affiliation when asking your question, and raise your hand in order to be identified, please? Yes, back here, straight away.
David Compston, formerly of the Manchester Commonwealth Games Organising Committee. First of all, I must congratulate your team on what is obviously superb project management. A great credit to the country and to your team. What interested me was your description of the main stadium. As you know, in Manchester, we designed it to be an athletic stadium and then a state-of-the-art football stadium, which is now the home of Manchester City. Alongside, we had a warm-up track, and we now have a £6,500 stadium for athletics. You now have the World Athletics Championships coming, and I wonder now what the long-term potential future is for the stadium.
Yes, well, as you know, there was the legacy company, which has actually been in place for a couple of years now, and London, again, the first country ever to get its legacy sort of company set up so early in the day. They held a competition to actually sell the stadium. That fell apart in sort of legal acrimony between West Ham and Spurs. And so they pulled the plug on that competition a few weeks ago. And now they've said that they will not sell the stadium. The stadium will be retained in public ownership. But they will then restart a competition in which people will actually bid for the use of the stadium. And if you take the Ricoh Stadium up in Coventry, for example, their Coventry Football Club don't own that stadium, and in fact they only provide 20% of the revenue to that stadium. The rest comes from other users of Ricoh. It's got a conference centre, it's got a hotel, it's got a casino attached to it, and that's the way they operate that. So here, we know Westfield are interested because Westfield bid with West Ham last time. We know that Essex Cricket Club are interested. They want to do 2020 cricket in the stadium. There has been talk of developing a sort of sports academy in and around the stadium, utilising the 700 rooms that we've got associated with it. There is a warm-up track, but the warm-up track is here. And that actually is on the old Bow East Railway siding, so in fact that will revert afterwards, and there's still a debate about what happens about the warm-up track. We went through the whole decision process about could we actually make it totally adaptable as a permanent 80,000 seat stadium where you retain the athletics but then could get the seating to come out, an adjustable seating to come across the track. We didn't do it in the end simply because of time and time debate in that thinking process and the cost. At one stage, the stadium was going to be 700 million, so there was a lot of pressure to get the costs down. And so things like adjustable seating went by the board. West Ham, I know, in their considerations, have brought that back into play. And for example, we had 35 million in our budget to take this down to 25,000 seats. That 35 million will now be made available to the legacy company. Newham are going to put another 40 million in, so there's 75 million immediately to make adaptations to the stadium to try and optimise how it might be used by the successful parties who will now bid to use it going forward. Bit of a long story, that one, sorry.
Thanks very much. The gentleman there in the middle.
Hello, Peter Briley from London Underground. I'd like to say thank you for a really good presentation there. I was interested in the way that you recycled the soil and the ground. Was that cost effective, or did you simply do it for environmental reasons?
We undoubtedly did it for environmental reasons. I mean, obviously, offsetting it, you've got landfill tax. Offsetting it, you've got all the cost of the lorry movements to take away, bring in fresh material, and so on. But it was one of those decisions where we said, that's what we're going to do. And we won't waste too much time sitting down trying to work out the cost-benefit analysis of whether this is the cost-benefit analysis, the right thing to do. We will do it in order to minimise disruption as well to the local residents and traffic in the area. So there were a whole series of reasons why we wanted to do it. Whether at the end of the day, having done it, we spent £20 million more than we would if we'd gone the traditional route, we decided we would not calculate. We were simply doing it because we wanted to do what we thought was the right thing. It's the beauty of a project this size, of course, that you can make some of your decisions in that way.
Thanks very much. Question just behind. Yeah.
John Lowe, Henry Royce Memorial Foundation. I'm so pleased that the whole project is on time, on budget, full functionality and so on. Recognising there's huge infrastructure and your personal background, how are the lessons that you've applied here going to be backward engineered into, say, rail infrastructure at Network Rail? P.S. What happened to South Weald Brentwood for the mountain biking?
What happened to?
South Weald Brentwood, which was the original choice for mountain biking, much nearer and bigger facilities.
I mean, South Weald and all the other options were all looked at, and in the end it was as much as anything a LOCOG decision as to where they wanted to finally position it. You also get the politics of, you know, let's have something which is a little bit more out in the country. I mean, all the decisions about these sort of things are a mixture of practicality as well as local and national politics. I didn't mention the learning legacy. We have now published on the web, available worldwide, 300 papers. And those 300 papers have been written by the people who've done all this, designed it, program managed it, managed the safety, whatever aspect it is, decided on the procurement program. So there are a series of papers out there, ranging from sort of 2 pages to 30 pages. Some of them are academic analyses of what we've done. And that's now been on the World Wide Web, as it were, for the last month. And most importantly, we've actually got what was OGC, but is now called the Major Projects Authority in Government, have agreed to take it on going forward. So the idea being that other projects can load up onto this website experience from future projects, so that we create, hopefully, a very large library of lessons learnt and how we've done it, and giving people the opportunity to obviously take that on board or not as they choose. But at least, and we made this decision 2 years ago, because we knew that if we didn't get it done before now, the guys would disappear, and we'd never be able to get it recorded. So again, we spent quite a lot of money pulling that lot together within the contractors and the designers and our own team. But it's out there.
Thanks very much. There's a question here in the front, I think, please, and then one very back.
My name's Captain Tim Brown, I'm an instructor at the Royal School of Military Engineering. We heard an introductory brief that we were going to hear about risk, and I don't believe we did. Just focusing on security risk, what were the major security implications of constructing the park here, and what issues did they cause during construction?
Yeah, so clearly for each of the venues, there was a decision about how we're going to design this. And an early decision was that we were not going to try and, basically harden the buildings to withstand explosions. It was a case of, if we do that, we're just going to spend an absolute fortune, and we will have to change the design in a way which will be unsatisfactory. So let's assume that there is sufficient intelligence out there that becomes the primary driver for security. Having said that, clearly we've not used ordinary glass anywhere. So wherever we've got glass panels and things, they are glass panels which are not going to shatter. The basketball was an interesting one, where in fact, having put that big envelope around that relatively lightweight steel frame, you actually need the envelope to give way, because otherwise the whole thing would fall over, if you had a major explosion inside it. So there are those sort of technicalities in consideration. The same with those temporary stands on the aquatics were quite a challenge, because again, you've actually got to make it sufficiently strong that if something does go on, then they're not actually going to buckle and fall down. But and again, the same problems with the wrap and so on going around it. This is probably the most secure place during the Olympic Games. There's a 3.5 metre wire fence which goes right the way around it with an electrified top. There are cameras at every 50 metres. And if you try and cut through the fence, then the alarm goes off and the camera swings to that point and so on. We use biometrics during the construction phase on all our operatives, so every single person could only get into the park on a palm reader. During the games itself, everybody will be searched in the way that you would be at an airport, and you'll have seen probably in the last few weeks tales about security costs going up. They are going up because inevitably ministers are now taking a low-risk decision. So, simple case, do you actually mag and bag every single person, and you could have 300,000 coming in on one day or more, or do you do 1 in 2? Well, if you do every single one, you need twice as many machines and twice as many people to do it. And that is now being looked at every single location. And of course, the risks at some of the off-site locations are actually much more difficult to manage than they are here. So access into, for example, Greenwich Park, you can't control at the end of the day to the same degree that you can here. As somebody from the Army pointed out to me yesterday, it wasn't ideal that you go through a tunnel as you come out of Stratford Station and go through the shopping centre to access the park, which is the route into the park. Perfect place for somebody with a rucksack. And therefore, all the time, how many people are going to be looking, watching? And it's the number of people looking, watching, which is actually pushing up the current security budget very significantly. But it's not my budget, it's the Home Office's and LOCOG's. But the fact that we've saved £1 billion on our budget, that £1 billion is now clearly being used to backfill some of these other costs which are now increasing.
Thanks very much. Back left.
Okay, thanks. My question is really related also to risk and the redundancy you had in the infrastructure, which I presume you had quite a lot to take into account, the number of people you have to move and so forth. But particularly I want you perhaps to mention what sort of contingency plan in terms of power you have in the park in case you have a heat wave in the summer.
I think a heat wave is something we'd much prefer to heavy rain. Those issues are by and large not ours to deal with. They're issues for LOCOG, but fundamentally they address those through the 75,000 volunteer force and how they're actually going to handle people. The stadia are designed to environmental requirements which are always a complication because the athletes require one thing, the spectators require something else. And so your big challenge for the designers is always trying to get very precise specification for what the swimmers or the cyclists want. The cyclists like it nice and warm because it lowers the density of the air and they go faster and so on. But the spectators don't want that, so how do you keep them cool upstairs? So those issues have all been addressed as best they can, of course, by the designers of each and every venue. The park itself is a dream, frankly, compared with Beijing. There were hardly any trees in Beijing. It was vast open areas. There will be lots of places here where you can get shelter and so on. When it comes to those risks that you're talking about, the area that we're most concerned about is transport. Security apart, the next one is transport, and all the debates and arguments which go on at the moment between all the different organisations are very much fundamentally focused on transport and managing the risk within transport. The transport will clearly be very much in the hands of Peter Hendy and TfL, who will be delivering the majority of people. We've already had various exercises which have taken place on that front, and there'll be more to follow. The whole lot's controlled from a new control centre at Palestra House in Southwark. Of course, you can control about 7,000 of the traffic signals in London individually, and all of that can be seen and controlled. What was I going to say on the other side of that? No, it's gone. There was something else on the risk side in continue. Oh, we've already had our special forces exercise for a weekend, conducting a Munich-style recovery. So let's assume terrorists go into the village. Let's assume that they've kidnapped the athletes, and a whole weekend was spent with a very live exercise going on, which amazingly the press never picked up, and did a lot of damage to various apartments. As the military colleagues found their way around this building they were unfamiliar with. But it was a sort of exercise which you have to do, and there are other things quietly going on all the time in the background to sort of address some of these key risks that we face. And it's the operational risks which at the end of the day will make or break the games. We can provide the facilities, but at the end of the day what people remember is whether they were able to enjoy it, whether they got there on time, whether they were able to get away easily, whether we don't have an O2 situation. And the O2 situation on the opening night was driven in part by security. There were some last-minute security changes which were introduced, and then it poured with rain, and before you know where you are, you've got a difficult situation.
Thanks very much. Lady here in the front.
Thanks very much. Sarah Springman, ETH Zurich, and also actually with my other hat, I'm a national and international triathlon officer, so you didn't mention triathlon because we haven't made your life very difficult.
No.
If anybody wants to come and watch, it's free to view, so please come to Hyde Park.
In Hyde Park.
I realise we're getting towards the end, so I'm going to ask you a question about what was the happening or the event that has given you the most sleepless nights?
Well, those who know me know that I don't really do sleepless nights. But undoubtedly the refinancing of the village. That certainly had they had the cold towels on in Treasury as we presented them with their options. And clearly we were going to have to do it. The thing about the Games is that the IOC have got two letters, one signed by Tony Blair, one signed by Gordon Brown, which say that doesn't matter what happens, you will get your Games. So they've got these guarantee letters. But clearly, every time we wanted to attack what we called programme contingency, which was for the really unexpected, and there was £1 billion in that. The way the budget broke down, it was 6 billion of cost and 2 billion of contingency. So we had a 33 billion contingency. We managed 1 billion. The second billion we had to go and get Treasury and a committee of ministers' approval, and the village came out of that. So that's been the biggest thing. The rest, I have to say, has gone remarkably smoothly, and that is absolute credit to the UK engineering and construction industry. And the aquatic centre was the most difficult thing to build, but that came in on time, and hats off to everybody involved in that. And I just cannot stop praising our industry in the way that it has tackled this, because everybody put their A teams in, and nobody wanted, of course, to be the guy who failed, which is a great driver. And it has gone exceptionally smoothly. The village terrified me, quite frankly. 2,800 apartments being built in a couple of years is an enormous logistical exercise, and we've had one contractor go bust in the middle of that process. And so that stopped his blocks for about 6 weeks whilst we recovered that situation. But fortunately, of course, we've benefited in some ways from the recession. It kept prices down, kept inflation down. Labour availability was good. We haven't talked about that, but 67% came from Britain, 10% from Ireland, and the rest from different European countries. And 95% of the contracts which have been placed for this have been with UK companies. So it's been again, very good in times of recession to be able to provide that volume of activity for companies across the country.
One last question, please.
John Newman, retired engineer. Could I just turn the topic to rowing for a moment, which is a sport where we've traditionally, over recent Olympics, done very well. I go to Dorney myself quite a lot, and I have to admit I haven't been there for perhaps 12 weeks. But my impression is that not a lot has happened at Dorney, and I wondered whether you could, as it were, correct me and tell me what is going to happen at Dorney.
Yeah, not a lot has happened. We've spent, I think, about 15 million, or might be a bit more than that at Dorney. They've made some alterations to the course in terms of creating channels between the sort of return lanes and the main race lanes. We've put a rather nice red bridge, which you may have seen in there. There's a control building being installed. There will be a lot to be done in a temporary way over the next 6 months in terms of staging and seating and so on. There's another bridge which is being installed for making access for people coming into the area easier. Dorney is a classic, really, of one of those sort of places which in many ways are more challenging than here, because people have got to walk quite a long way from the station. So you've got to make available different forms of transport for people who are disabled and so on. You've got to create temporary roads for some of it. So all of that will go in during the next 6 months. So a lot of these temporary venues will be transformed during the next 6 months. And the reason for that is because it's all on hire. And because it's all on hire, you don't want it for a day longer than you need it. And of course then there'll be a massive exodus afterwards, so all this stuff goes off hire as quickly as possible. And that all falls within LOCOG's budget. LOCOG's budget for that sort of thing is about 800 million. So they are in the process at the moment of spending about 800 million on what is called overlay. And it's all this temporary stuff which gets added in at the end of the process.
Thank you very much. I think it's probably time to draw this part of the proceedings to a close, but can I, in doing so, thank John very much. I think a couple of times in your speech, John, you used the phrase, quite an achievement. I think that must really count as some very significant understatement. The scale, the complexity of the project and the project management has been tremendous, and you've clearly engaged in it in a tremendous fashion, and I hope the Academy, at least, will learn some of the lessons with its own rather smaller scale refurbishment of its building. But John, thank you not only for the achievement of this splendid project, but also for the tremendous lecture you've given us tonight. Thank you very much.